How do you do YouTube intros? Anyway, so I both love and hate these pants.
So I was very scattered this morning, so let me explain a couple things real fast. The mic quality here was also pretty rough, so I'm gonna save you from the worst of it. I have a new one on the way, I'm so sorry. So a few months ago, I made these bell-bottoms, and I'm just not very happy with them. They fit pretty well when I'm standing, but there are some severe fit issues that I need to fix before I'm comfortable wearing these again. I absolutely love the embroidery I did with the pockets in the front and the back, but the waistband is very uncomfortable. I want to adjust the bell as that turned out kinda awkward, and there's also a few other small things that I want to adjust. So in today's video, I'm going to make these again and adjust those things.
So let me talk about what went wrong with this pair of pants. We're gonna remake them. I'm going on a trip soon. I'm going to go visit my brother, and I would love to be able to wear these pants. To start, this buttonhole, right here. I'm actually missing a button right now because the buttonhole is actually too small. It was rubbing on the thread too much, and yeah, it just snapped there. But it was making it really hard for me to push the button through and to be able to, put the pants on properly. So we're gonna fix that when we do a whole new fly. Right here. So you can kind of tell this tab is where my side seam is. It is really far back. It's like too far back. It needs to be closer to about here, which is only about an inch of a difference, but it's an inch on both sides. And it's causing this waistband when I sit down to dig into my stomach. It's not comfortable to sit in. It looks bad. It just, it's not perfect. I do also love the extreme bell that I have in these pants. They are so cute. I love how flared they are. They're just a little bit short. And while I do love the bell, because it's about this wide when it's laid down, as much as I love that width, I think we need to make them a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna shorten that or width a little bit, make them a little bit nicer. And yeah, we're just gonna remake these pants because I love them and I wish I could wear them more and I wish I felt better. But first, let me show you what actually happens when I do sit down in these pants. Sitting on my stairs, we're not going to talk about it, it's tiny. So here's what happens when we sit down. It's doing this pooch thing right here. It does it more severely, see, like that. This would be where the button is closed. And you see this like bump right here? It's because this waistband is digging too far into my stomach, which is caused by this seam being too far back. So this is why you want your side seams to hit your side, I guess. So I'm gonna go get the pattern and we're gonna mock up, see where the pattern is sitting right now. I don't have any fabric that's gonna stretch like this, so something I'm gonna have to keep in mind while I alter this pattern. The reason this is as far as it is I had to embroider everything first. So I embroidered the pockets first before I even started putting this thing together. And when I did put it together and I put it on to test the fit, I realized that there was a lot of extra room in my hips, and so I needed to take that in. However, I couldn't just take it out of both the front pieces and the back pieces because I had already embroidered the web, and I embroidered it specifically to fit right there in that corner. So if I took this in at the embroidery, it would have covered that up some, and I wasn't really willing to let some of that go. That's why that's like that. We're going to fix that with this new pattern. I'm going to account for that. I will see you when I've got a mock-up made. So I got my mock-up done. We're very snug, but there are definitely some problem places that I want to work on. As I was working on this, I did go ahead and write them down. The mock-up is pretty snug up here, honestly. Like, it fits everywhere, just like perfectly. The thighs are a little bit tight, but I kind of like that for the jeans because I don't know, it feels better. It's just tight because this fabric doesn't stretch at all. So I know when we get to the stretch fabric, this is no longer going to be as nice and snug. It's going to need to come in a little bit. So I'm going to take an inch out of both, or a half an inch out of both hips. So when I made the last pair, I ended up moving that side seam in, which means that this pocket piece is going to change. So I'll be able to alter the embroidery pattern. The back of these. So this actually needs to go up a little bit. The back kind of lowers even with the waistband. It's still a little bit low in the back, so I'm going to raise that up. I need to adjust the crotch curve of the back just a little bit. And then, like I was saying before, I'm going to alter the bell curve of these pants and make them a little bit longer. When I made the official pair last time, I was very dumb and I did not pre-wash any of my fabric. That was not a good idea because when I washed the pair for the first time, they shrank a lot. I have already pre-washed my fabric. It's sitting. I just need to iron it because it's super wrinkly because it got washed. Now I just need to work on this list of alterations that I've got here. And yeah, it's probably going to be tomorrow by the time I get another mock-up. So I will see you then. I thought about it. I'm gonna be a chaos gremlin and just make the alterations to the pattern and make the thing. Because quite honestly, this fits great. I'm not going to make alterations enough that it's going to jeopardize the overall fit more than I already did. And if by the time I get to making it and I have to do another alteration thing, like I did for the last pair and have to move the seam around, then I'm just going to rip out the embroidery and do it again. So I'm going to make the alterations to the pattern. I'm going to see where I'm at if I want to bother making a mock-up because I know that mock-up won't fit. I don't have stretchy material. So I might just have, I might just have to make the damn thing. Let's go do that. Okay, so I'm going to go over the pattern real fast and a little bit of the alterations that I made. I'm just going to show you the pattern pieces just to give you an idea. So to start with, that I believe is the back piece, big ol' wide curve, and then it just gets into a taper. And this wonky line is because of the waistband shape that I'm going to use. These are just some reference points for the pockets. And then this is the crotch curve that I adjusted. I just kind of brought it in a little bit by like maybe a 1/4 inch. It really wasn't very much. And then up here you can kind of see a few of the remaining lines from where I brought in the waist. These are right now what I kind of landed on for what I think is going to be a good fit. Okay, and then please excuse the mess. I live in a tiny home. It's not always the easiest to stage things. Here is the front panel for the pants. See if I can get it all in frame. Ooh, just barely. Okay. Pretty wide bell curve at the front. I did bring both of those bell curves for the front and the back in just a little bit. I just moved that line in and adjusted the curve and everything. Here, this front line is actually going to be the pocket and the one that Tara is standing on right now. Thank you, Tara. That one is the crotch seam. Not a whole lot of alterations happened with this one. It was just a little bit tricky to get the hip curve correct. Pretty much I just had to fill in the gap of the missing pocket right there and like extend that curve up. And then I just brought that seam in by an inch to do that alteration. So the front pocket technically has like 3 pieces if you include the front pant pattern, and then it also has these 2 pieces as well. That one goes on the very back. That's like the one that'll be touching my waist. I'll also be doing the embroidery right in there. That is the bag lining, so this is what makes the pocket bag. These two didn't really get edited much. I did kind of edit that curve like right there, and I just mirrored it on both of the pieces because this will line up about like so. And that's how the pocket comes together. And then I've got a few other small pieces for the pattern as well. This is the back pocket, pretty straightforward. This is the fly lining. So this will be what creates that like fly look on the pant. And then belt loops. I gotta make 6 of them. I hate belt loops.
None of my pattern pieces needed to be on a fold, so it's a little easier to lay them out on the fabric, which is folded, so I can get the 2 pieces per cut. I'm using some wrapping paper that I got on a discount as my pattern pieces. It's cheap and I can get a lot of it. So I don't like to pin my pattern pieces to my fabric a lot. I don't like that it creates holes. It's a lot easier to rip the pattern. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna trace it out with a gel pin. I like using gel. It washes out really easy, but will also stay on the fabric for as long as I need to, which chalk rubs off really easy. And once that is done, I can then move on to the embroidery. First, we need to trace out the pattern. Again, I'm using that same gel pen. Right now, I am figuring out where my seams are going to be with these pattern pieces cut out. I need to make sure I'm not about to embroider into the seam. So I'm getting my little gauge out and I'm just making a few marks here and there to get the seam allowance. So I'm starting with my back pockets, and this is a little design I made, pretty simple, RIP inside of a coffin. My front pockets and my back pockets are both just going to be embroidered with simple lines. So what I'm drawing on right now is pretty much just going to be it. Drawing out the webs for my front pockets is going to be a little different. The spider web is going to be behind the pocket opening in the front, so I need to start by marking off where that opening is. Then account for seam allowance, which I'm going to do with some small dots like I did with the back pockets. Now with my seam allowance marked off, I can then start drawing the lines of the spider web using a ruler and also tracing the seam allowance line for the outermost spiderweb lines, if that makes sense. I'm not going to worry about this being super perfect. I do kind of want it to look even, but spiderwebs are an organic thing, right? So it's totally okay if they're not super perfect. At least that's what I tell myself. Now that my long lines of the spider webs are drawn, you can see I've come in and I'm starting to draw the curved lines. On my old pair of bell-bottoms, I had these curved lines in kind of a row. They were all equal. I didn't really like that. After seeing some other webs, I was kind of inspired to do an uneven look and kind of a scattered curved line look. I enjoy this so much better. It looks so cute to me. So once I have my embroidery patterns drawn on all 4 pockets, I can then move on to the actual embroidery. I'm using some white regular basic embroidery floss. I use 2 threads per. And with my back pockets, I'm doing all of these lines doubled up. I just like the thickness of it. I do the double thickness on the RIP, like the entirety of that, and then I do a double thickness on the long lines of the spider webs, and then the curved lines I'll just do a single thickness embroidery for those lines. I like the contrast it gives. does anybody else find tying off a long embroidery project incredibly satisfying? Because I definitely do. Now that the embroidery is done, we can move on to the construction of the pants. Again, I'm starting with the back pockets. I'm gonna start with the top edge with a rolled hem. First, I'm gonna roll the top down by about 1/4 inch. I'll pin it and then sew it. Now with that first seam done at the very top, I'm gonna roll that top hem down again by 1/2 inch. Again, pin, sew it, same thing. This time I am gonna do 2 rows of stitches, mostly for aesthetics. Now that that top hem is done, I'm gonna go ahead and work on all of the side and bottom seams of the pockets and go ahead and finish those off as well. Same thing that I did with the top seam, just a rolled hem, roll it once, stitch it down, roll it again, stitch it down. Once I have the edges of the pockets finished, I'll go ahead and place them onto the back panels of the pants. I'll make sure they're even, in the right spot, all of that. I do have a couple of marks from the pattern as guides. Because I did so many adjustments, they weren't perfect guides and things didn't match up the best, but I was able to at least use them as a reference point. And you know what? Close enough. It's a little bit easier for me to attach these to the back pieces before the pants are put together, just because if I waited until it was already fully assembled, I'd be fighting a lot of fabric and fabric that's wanting to pull in different directions. So this is why I'm getting the pockets done now and out of the way. I will also make sure to do a back stitch a few times off of the side of the pocket just to make sure they're anchored really well and not about to rip off. And with that done, we're going to get the front pockets sorted out next. There are 3 pieces per side: the front pants panel, the pocket lining, and the pocket back, which has the embroidery. So for me, it's very hard to tell the front and back of this material. I know when I cut it, I made sure that the back of the material was facing out. Because I'm dyslexic and I have trouble with this, I'm just going to fold this out a little bit and lay the pocket lining pieces and just pin them so I know which side is which. Real fast and easy way for me to not mess this part up. Once I have the seam allowance clipped for both pockets, I'm going to go ahead and flip this right side out and then kind of move the fabric, move the seam until it is flat and flush against the edge there. I'm then going to pin it in place and then I'll run 2 lines of stitches once this is pinned in place. Now that I have a nice pretty pocket opening seam, we're going to add the back of the pocket, which is the piece that I embroidered. So I'm going to start by laying the embroidered piece over what we've already done. I'm going to line up the notches I made in the pattern just to make sure everything is in the right spot. And then I'm going to run a seam line along the outer edge of just the pocket back. Nobody asked for it, but I'm doing one anyway. Machine tour! The machine I'm using is a beautiful Singer 503A Rocketeer Slant-O-Matic. She's beautiful. She was made in the 60s, and this is one of the first models with stitch settings other than just straight. The way this machine does this is by some little gears that go in the very top. So the very top of the machine, you can kind of see, has a guide on the different stitch settings that this machine can handle. The numbers at the top of that guide correspond with the numbers on the gear. And so I'm going to be using the number 9 gear. It's a 3-stitch zigzag. So to set this all up, of course, you're going to start by putting the gear in the slot. And then at the very top right here, the STR is the stitch, I believe, width. I'm going to set this to 5. I want a wide zigzag. We're going to make sure it stays centered. And then I'm going to make my stitches as long as possible. So we're going to have a wide, loose zigzag, something not really super straight. I was hoping for a faux serge. I think I need to play around with this a little bit more to figure that out. Here, I'm going to change the foot of my machine to make sure it can handle that nice zigzag stitch and not hit one of the feet and break a needle. Oh my goodness, I'm just so happy with how these pockets look right now. They look so good! So, I want these pants to outlast me. Probably unrealistic to dream that, but you know what, I'm gonna dream anyway. To do this, I'm going to do some French seams. If you don't know what a French seam is, I'm gonna try to explain this as best as I can. I learned by a lot of trial and error, and so that's how I'm always going to suggest other people try, is just try. To do a French seam, you're going to do your first seam backwards. Usually you start with the right sides faces in, so we're going to start with the right sides facing out. I'm going to start with the crotch seams just to get this together the fastest I can. Now that I have that first line done, I'm going to go ahead and clip the curve a little bit and trim the seam allowance pretty close. This is how I get away with doing a French seam in a curve. Just clip it close and get as close to the stitches as you are comfortable getting, and then trim that excess. Once it's trimmed, flip it to where the inside is now facing out. We're then going to pinch the seam, kind of work it and move it to where the seam is at the farthest point that it can possibly be. I'm going to pin it and then do another row of stitches further in, and that's a French seam. This will create a little pouch for the raw edges to be encased in. This makes it really hard for fraying fabric to continue to fray, and it makes a really strong, sturdy seam, which you really kind of want in a crotch seam. So I tried to do this on camera, but I was definitely getting frustrated. So I went ahead and figured out the fly off camera. And I'll try to explain this as best as I can. So what I figured out is on the back side of the fly, I just needed to fold over the seam allowance by my 5/8 inch and then pin it to the corresponding side of the zipper. I'm gonna get the edge of that folded fabric right up against the zipper. It's not gonna catch. It's gonna be floppy enough that'll be just fine. So I'm gonna pin that in place and then run a single stitch close to the zipper. And the other side is where I definitely got confused last time. So I made this little placket thing. I don't really know what to call it. It's a flap. All I did off camera for this was roll over the outer edge of the flap by about 1/4 inch just to give it a nice edge. And then in theory, I'll be able to attach the flat edge to the flat side of the still raw fly. So I'm starting with that curved edge of the fly flap. I really don't know what to call this thing. Somebody help me out here. With the curved edge sewn, I'm gonna go ahead and run that straight stitch to get the zipper attached to the back of the fly. I'm gonna start by changing the foot back to my zipper foot. I know it's called a zipper foot, but I honestly prefer this one as my main sewing foot. It's just easy to work around, and it's got that nice curved raised bit on the front. It's just nice. Now that the zipper is attached, I'm gonna go ahead and attach that fly flap. With that sewn and attached, I'll go ahead and flip that inside and then finish this nice pretty edge, same way I did with like the pockets. With the outer edge finished, I'm gonna run another stitch line along that curved edge on the fly flap. It'll give you that curved edge that you see on jeans. And it'll also make sure this facing stays down. With that done, the next step is to attach the zipper to the other side of the pants. The way I'm gonna do that is I'm just gonna lay these down. I'm gonna make sure the fly edge is hitting where it needs to be and making sure everything is centered still. I'll make sure to run a line more on the inside of that curved stitch line that we've already done. This will catch the zipper and make that double line that you're used to seeing with jeans. Now that the fly is done, I'm gonna go ahead and get the center back seam done with the French seam as well. And now that both the front and the back crotch seams are done, I can move on to the side seams and the inseam and hopefully have something pants shaped soon. Starting with my outer seams, I'm going to start at the very top of the hips and again do another French seam along the length of the legs. I'll make sure that the pockets are laying exactly how they should be, match the notches and everything to make sure there's no wrinkling or anything. Because this is a French seam and I have only so much space to work with against these embroideries, I'm going to try and do a small seam to start with for that very first stitch on the French seam. The inseam is going to happen about the same as the other seams. It's a French seam, nothing fancy. I just start with the center crotch seam as it's an easy reference point to make sure everything is straight. Off camera, I went ahead and did a quick test fit now that it was put together enough that I can. So far, it's fitting much better than the old pair, and I'm starting to get really excited. With that test fit, I did realize that the front of the waist was a little bit high, so you can see the marks that I made. I'm just going to lower it a little bit when I attach the waistband. I do see in some points that lower bit is going to dig into the embroidery, but at this point, I'm okay with that. With the legs put together, I'll go ahead and get the waistband attached next. I'm gonna start with the center back point as it's just an easy anchor point, and a waistband isn't super easy to start just at one end and go to the other, especially one that has any curves like this. So I'm gonna start by doing a quick few little reference marks of where my seam allowance is going to be in this point on the waistband. This is just gonna be an easy marker for me when I pin and get this in place and ready for the actual sewing. With that marked, I'm gonna just line everything up and pin it, again starting at the center and then working my way out to the front. Doing half at a time, I'm gonna go ahead and run this line of stitch out to the front, and then I will unpin it and then pin it to the other side and then run that same line of stitch on that side. With the first layer of the waistband attached, I will then get the second layer sewn onto the straight top edge. That way it can be flipped to the inside and sewn down. At this point, I forgot belt loops were a thing, and then I remembered that they were a thing and they needed to happen. So I have 6 belt loops that I'm going to make. I'm going to start by just making tubes and sewing them with as little seam allowance as I can manage. With all of the tubes sewn, I'm going to separate them and then flip them inside out. Once all of the tubes were turned out, I then went ahead and pressed them all flat. I tried to make sure that the seam was at the center of one of the sides. It didn't need to be super neat. It wasn't going to show at all. Once they're all flat, I'll go ahead and run 2 lines of top stitches on each end of the loops and call that good enough. Back to the pants. So I needed to make room for all of those nice belt loops that I just made. So I'm gonna take my little sewing awl and I'm going to find the placement of where I want the loops to be and then just pop a couple stitches around that area, just enough for me to slip one of the belt loops through that and then stitch it down again. So once I have all of my little belt loops pinned in place, I'm gonna just run a single straight stitch along that top edge again and flip the whole waistband right side out. After trimming the tabs on the waistband, I'm gonna fold them over and pin them down. I'm also going to go over the rest of the waistband and pin that down and get it ready for its final top stitch. With that pinned, I'm going to start with the very top line of top stitches to get that set in place. To finish out the waistband on the inside, I'm going to take note of where my seam is. So I'm going to fold the bottom edge under to where it's just at that line. With everything pinned in place, I'm going to run that top stitch along the bottom of the waistband. And now, a moment of ADHD. For some reason, I went ahead and did the bottom hem of my legs first before I finished the belt loops. I don't know. I was getting bored of the waistband, I guess. So the bottom hem of the bell bottoms on the legs is just a rolled hem. I'm gonna roll each one by 1/2 inch and then 2 rows of top stitches, and that's it. Once I got that out of my system, I guess I can finally finish the waistband. To start, I made the belt loops longer than they needed so I could trim them down. All I did was measure where I wanted them to lay with a little bit of slack, folded it over once and trimmed it where it needed to be, and then of course just pinned that down. Once it's pinned down, I'm gonna run a quick straight stitch over that. I think I did it like 3 or 4 times just to make sure it'll be super sturdy. With the construction of the pants finally done, they fit perfectly. I'm so happy with them so far. All I need to do is the button and the buttonhole. My machine doesn't have a buttonhole function. I know there is an attachment, but I honestly prefer to do these by hand anyway. I really like the way they look when I do them by hand. The way I do buttonholes is I will start off by marking how big of a hole I'll need. I usually just trace the widest part of the button and then draw a straight line between those marks. I'll then go ahead and cut along that line that I just drew. For the buttonhole stitching, I'm going to be using the same white embroidery thread I used for the rest of the embroidery. I'll start the stitch between the layers of fabric, going up to the top. With my knot buried, I'm then going to make one stitch down through all of the layers of the front panel, and I'll pull it through until there's a loop, which I'll then thread my needle through and pull it straight. This is the buttonhole stitch that I do, and I will go around the buttonhole 2 or 3 times, just doing the same stitch over and over again. It's a pretty sturdy stitch. It prevents any fraying around the buttonhole, and it's pretty quick for me to do. I think this buttonhole really only took me like 5 minutes to do. Once the buttonhole is done, all I have to do is attach the button to the other side of the fly, and then that is the bell bottoms done, and we are off to the final reveal.
I'm so happy. I am so happy with these. These turned out so well. They are super comfortable. They fit like a glove now. We are still a little bit kind of far back on the side seam. I did kind of hide it with a little belt loop there. I did check that when I did my mock-up, and I didn't think that the side seams were too far back when I did that. So it might just be a part of this being as stretchy as it is, because this is a very stretchy denim. But you know what? When I sit down, it's a lot more comfortable. Throughout the making process, once I had my side seams and my inseam done, I did make sure to put it on, and I made sure that everything fit before I put the waistband and everything on. I'm so happy. I am so happy. They turned out so nice and they're so comfortable. I am super proud of myself for figuring out the fly situation. That was a new thing for me. I did it once before following a pattern, and I tried to find that pattern that I used before and couldn't really find it. And I don't know, I just kind of laid everything out and had to figure that out on my own, just by trial and error. And that's part of crafting that I absolutely love, is that trial and error part. So yeah, I'm super happy with these. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know. Stick around. Feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be doing more spooky stuff like this. I am so happy it's Halloween season. We're going to make some more spooky stuff. Stick around. See you later.